Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity. AJ Eckstein, thank you so much for being with us on this episode of People in Transition. I'm really excited about our discussion today.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for having me. I'm a big listener of People in Transition, and I think in the last year or so with COVID, there's been so much transition, so it's going to be a great discussion today.
AJ, you've gone through a number of transitions throughout your career. Why don't you describe some of those transition moments that you've experienced and give us a little insight in terms of how you've managed transitions?
Absolutely. Well, I think that everyone, wherever you are in the different chapters of your life, you will go through change and transition. I think it's absolutely inevitable. And I would start off by saying that I went to undergrad at USC, the Marshall School of Business, and I actually graduated during the pandemic. So our kind of the end of senior year went from in person. It was very fun, very social, constantly networking with different students, to then moving back home, taking classes remotely, and also not having a graduation. So that was an extremely big bummer, and it was a huge transition for me. I also had a ton of post-grad travel plans. I was going to backpack Southeast Asia before I started my full-time strategy and consulting job. That got canceled. I was going to move up to San Francisco. And then I had a 6-month job delay. So that was another transition. And then I would just say college to post-grad life is one of the biggest transitions that I know a lot of your listeners are either in college or transitioning to post-grad. And the biggest thing that I've learned is time is really not on your side when you graduate, and you don't realize how much free time you have. So we can definitely talk more about that college to post-grad life. And I would say one of the last things is consulting, whether it's management, strategy, tech, operations consulting. There is so much change that happens in the industry, and I'd be more than happy to dive deeper into the transition in consulting.
AJ, love to hear about your thoughts on the change and transition in consulting.
Absolutely. So I would say the first thing, if you ask anybody in school of why they want to pursue consulting, 9 times out of 10, they will say that the travel intrigues them. And I think that if you don't want to work a 9-to-5 desk job, consulting is very interesting because there's so much transition, right? You are traveling usually on Mondays, you go to the airport, and Monday through Thursday, you're staying at a hotel at the client site, and it really could be anywhere in the world. Thursday night, you come back, you're sleeping in your bed, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then you repeat. So you're really on the road around 50 weeks of the year. Obviously, when I started, COVID hit. So I never got to travel. Coming in thinking I'd be traveling every week to then never traveling was a huge change for me and a lot of my fellow analysts in our start class. But I think what we realized is you have to look at the positive in a negative situation. And there were actually a lot of positives that came from not traveling every week, obviously, because it sounds very glamorous, but travel does get to become a headache and flights get delayed and it takes time away from your friends and family who live nearby your home. So it's challenging. And also in consulting, so many things change and transition. So clients, you will transition clients every few months or every few years when you switch projects. Managers and teams, that will continue to transition. The types of projects you get, budget changes, there could be budget constraints, there could be budget additions, the scope of the project, and also just if it's in person versus travel.
Let's shift gears just a little bit here, AJ, and talk a bit about networking. And you'd mentioned that a bit earlier. What does networking mean to you?
Networking to me means building long-term relationships rather than making something a transaction. I think what schools teach, if they even teach a class on networking or just the normal thought of how networking works, is you network to get a job. And that's very transactional. I'm going to reach out to Bob because I want a referral, because I want to chat with him to learn more about the company, but it's transactional. I want something from Bob. I think what real networking is, and especially how I look at it, is just really building strong relationships. It could be professional, it could be social, really wherever. And I think the biggest issue is people do it last minute. So they're about to graduate college, it's senior year, and they try to network to get a job. But I think networking should start literally freshman year or even earlier, because that's how you plant the seed. And that is how you build long-term relationships. And the longer the relationship, the stronger it is and the less transactional it is. So let's say that I want to reach out to Bob senior year versus Bob freshman year. I could talk about that I'm a big fan of the People in Transition podcast, that I love what you're doing. We can hop on an intro chat and we're just chatting with each other. And you learn that I'm a freshman. Maybe I'm not eligible for an internship or a job yet, but you learn more about what I'm doing. And then we stay connected on LinkedIn and we touch base every let's say few months, few years. By the time I am eligible, or maybe one of us doesn't need something, it's much more organic rather than sending a cold email or a cold networking outreach message saying, hey, I need something like a referral. So to me, again, networking is building organic long-term relationships.
And AJ, how can you learn better networking skills along the way?
It's a great question, Bob. And I wish I could say, do these 3 things and you'll be the best networker in the world. I think the biggest thing is there's no course, no video, no book, no nothing that will teach you enough about networking other than just diving into it and talking to people. I think networking really does favor extroverts. Not that introverts can't network, but it will be harder because you have to put yourself out there. So I would recommend starting early, being comfortable, being uncomfortable, putting yourself out there. You will get ghosted. You will get rejection messages. You will get people saying, I don't want to talk to you, but it's a numbers game, right? And I'm not saying to rapid fire send 100 messages a day. You should be very careful and tailored with what you say and to whom. But if you spend the time to research somebody and you send a thoughtful outreach message, that will really help. And I could tell you what you should say and what you should ask and how you should go about it. But really the best way to do it is to get your feet wet and to learn from different conversations. And the coolest thing about networking a lot of times is you don't know what the outcome can be. And I've met people who I've had such a great conversation with before, they've actually become my mentors. Or even on the flip side, I love chatting with them and we're very similar. We have very similar backgrounds. They become my mentees. So again, I think networking, the biggest thing you can do is just put yourself out there and starting to talk to more people than you're doing today.
AJ, what would a networking group be, and how might you use that networking group to help you in that process?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say that the first place I would look, especially, I know a lot of your audience is still, let's say, in school, let's say at a college or university, is the clubs and organizations that you're a part of. So if you have a similarity already, it's much easier to network. So you can network with the alumni base, you can network with people in a certain club, like a consulting club, a finance club, really any type of club or organization, because you have something in common. I also think there are literal mentorship programs where they pair you up with somebody, and that is very organic networking. And also just finding people on LinkedIn. I remember that I've seen people on LinkedIn who I could tell they do X, Y, and Z thing, and it's very similar to what I'm doing. We have an intro chat, we meet a couple times, we really hit it off, and we almost become friends in a professional setting. And it might not be an actual title of mentor-mentee in an actual mentor program, but they are mentoring me and vice versa. So I think that if you can find a mentorship or networking group, it only is going to benefit you.
AJ, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in resume layout or verbiage on resumes today?
I would say the first big shift that I've seen is LinkedIn has never been more important. I remember when I was applying to internships and jobs a few years ago, LinkedIn was something on an application where it was optional. I think today it is required. It is something where if it is not built, that is an issue. And the reason why, and I know you asked about resumes and I brought up LinkedIn, is because regardless of how your resume looks, the recruiter or the hiring manager or the person you reach out to network with, they will go to your LinkedIn. Of course, you still have to have a solid resume, but I think LinkedIn is a place where you can get away from the very structured resume, right? A resume is a piece of white paper with black text, and it's usually one page for people in college or early career professionals. And there's not much to change and to make it unique, right? You can't add color, you can't add a picture. It's just pretty simple. I mean, it should stay structured and you should add all the other things that most people talk about showing results and impact, making sure it looks very easily digestible and talks about everything that you're up to. But I do think the biggest shift is that the resume is a little bit less important than it used to be. And LinkedIn is the place where you need to invest time in because there's so many opportunities. And if you don't have an optimized and updated LinkedIn profile, then I think it doesn't complement your resume, which it really should.
I recently heard this statement about resumes. Getting an interview happens when you examine what a company is looking for and build your resume backwards from there, not looking back at your experience and building your resume forward. What's your reaction to that?
I think it's a very valid statement, and I think it's very similar to the cover letter as well. So whenever I was applying to either an internship or job opportunity, the first thing that I would do before I apply is I look at the application. And the beauty of an application is the company is literally telling you word for word what they're looking for, what's required, what's optional, what's a good to have, and a ton of other information. So if you're just sending one version of your resume rapid fire to everybody, there's a very low chance that you will get an interview. However, if you look at what they're looking for on the application and then look at your experiences and say, okay, what could I focus on? What verbiage are they using that I could use? What buzzwords are they using that I could use? And how could I pick my experiences and actually make multiple versions of my resume for each company? And if you can't do for each company because it can get tricky, I would group them by industry. So if I'm applying to a marketing internship, that's going to be very different skills than applying to an investment banking job, let's say, right? So I remember when I was applying, I had different versions and I would have them in different folders, one for strategy consulting, one for tech and tech consulting, one for banking and finance. And also reading through these applications, I would suggest printing the application, grabbing a yellow highlighter and actually highlighting keywords, things you're looking for. So put yourself in the shoes of the decision maker. If you're reading the application and then your resume, does it make sense? Is that a good fit? Or is it so far off that you're going to get thrown in the pile of no's?
AJ, I realize that there are multiple job search channels available to help me land the perfect job. Should I use the one that I'm most comfortable with or use more than one approach?
That's another great question. I would say there obviously are a ton of different job platforms out there. The first one that I would go to is LinkedIn, given that it is really easy to apply. It's actually, the button is literally called Easy Apply on LinkedIn. And if you have, again, an updated LinkedIn profile, you're not necessarily uploading a resume. It might be optional, actually. You're applying through your LinkedIn profile. So I would say LinkedIn is the go-to for me. I would also suggest going to the careers pages on a lot of these larger, especially big tech companies, big corporations, because they will have their own careers page and you'll apply directly through them. And then of course you have the third parties like the Indeed, the Monster. There's a new startup called HireEct where you actually can direct message recruiters and hiring managers. And I actually work with them pretty closely. And we actually were through the final round, which you can talk about later in this episode. We actually were hiring through HireEct. So I think the biggest thing is don't get bogged down about what platform you should focus on. I would say LinkedIn, number one, number two, careers pages, and number three, these new companies like the HireEct. You can message hiring managers and recruiters directly.
AJ, how do you feel about informational interviews and what should you expect to get out of them?
I think informational interviews are fantastic, especially for the segment of your audience who is unsure of what they want to do. I think it's very common. I have a lot of people reach out to me, whether it's through text, email, LinkedIn message, asking, saying, hey, can you help me get a job? And the first thing I will always say is, well, what job do you want to get? Right. And I think I also do a lot of career coaching, and a career coach is essentially a GPS. But I can't help you get to your destination if you don't tell me where you want to go. So I think going back to your original question of informational interviews, there's no better way to learn about what people do day to day than having informational interviews. And I would suggest don't even try to schedule 30 minutes with somebody. Literally 10 to 15 minutes, asking a few questions, and you're also networking in the process. So of course you can watch the day in the life videos on YouTube, let's say, but the biggest thing is just scheduling 10 to 15-minute informational interviews and share that you are a freshman or a sophomore, or you're lost in your career and you want to learn more about X industry, and you're there to just learn. You're not there to get a referral. You're not there to ask for something. All you're doing is trying to receive more information, and people love talking about what they're doing and really about themselves.
AJ, when the effectiveness of communication is so tied to nonverbals, and today many of the at least beginning interviews are done over the telephone, how do you make certain that you come across the right way on that telephone interview?
The first suggestion I would say, and this is actually a tip that I learned through doing a lot of public speaking and a lot of interviews like this on the podcast, is try to do your phone interview standing up. Because I think standing up, you have a little bit more energy than sitting down, right? You don't see a lot of people doing keynote speeches sitting in a chair, right? They're at the podium, they're standing, maybe they have the microphone, they're walking around it. I would do the same thing. I would have your notes in front of you, of course, but try to do it standing up, right? You don't have to wear a suit and tie. There's no reason to be stressed. But the first thing I would do is stand up. The second thing is, wherever your personality and your energy is, you need to maximize that tenfold. What I mean by that is, even if you're someone who's a little bit more introverted, you need to blow the person out of the water on the other side of the phone. And I'm not saying you have to go crazy and be the most energetic person ever and pretend that you're on drinking 10 Red Bulls, but you have to show your interest and passion over the phone. If it's a dull conversation and I feel like I'm talking to a robot, why in the world would I hire you or give you the interview? However, if it's a very organic conversation and you're doing great at small talk and you're asking me questions and I can tell that you're very interested and passionate about the role in the company, why wouldn't I push you forward to the interview? So that would be probably my biggest piece of advice, is really show your energy and passion through the phone as much as you can, and almost pretend that you're doing a video and you're smiling and you're showing interest and excitement, because that does get carried over the phone, but you have to go above and beyond more than you would in person or over video.
AJ, some companies are using panel interviews, 2, 3, 4 sometimes people gathered together conducting the interview simultaneously. Any thoughts or suggestions on how the applicant should handle that panel interview?
Those types of interviews are definitely challenging. I would also say that they're not super common, but what I have seen over the years is you have to be ready to adapt, right? This whole podcast is talking about transition and change. So I think that, first of all, always ask the interviewer or the recruiter that you're working with before the interview if they can share any information, whether that is the type of interview, as in a phone interview versus video versus in person, who you'll be interviewing with, right? If they can give the names, that will be a huge leg up because you can research them. And also, is it a panel? Is it one-on-one, etc.? So that's the first thing. You don't want to go into an interview blind and not be ready to adapt. That's the first thing. The second thing is, just try to stay under control and just stay comfortable. Of course, it's a little bit stressful when it's 2-on-1, 3-on-1, 5-on-1, which I've been a part of, but just stay comfortable and try to build a rapport and relationship with every single person. Don't act stressed. Don't act nervous. Just pretend that you're having a conversation and meeting new people. I think that would be a great tip to really ace those panel interviews.
Any thoughts or suggestions if you're asked to take one of the many psychometric tests in the interview process?
I love that question, Bob, because I've taken a lot of those. I think one of the companies is called Metrics, and they do a lot for a lot of the large consulting companies and also investment banks. And there really are not a ton of ways to study for them. I think there are some resources online where you can study for them, but it's not something where you need to ace it to get the interview, as in like an SAT or ACT to get into college. I think they're two very different things. So obviously do your best, be in a quiet room, try to focus, take notes if you're allowed to. And the companies who do use that, it's not super common. I would say it's gotten more common over the years, but for me, I probably had a few handful of companies that actually offered that. So just again, be ready to adapt. The questions are very random and some of them are very tedious. I remember one of them was popping a balloon and continuing to pop it for money. And then it tests these random skills. And what it was testing is your interest in risk, basically, or are you risk averse? So again, super random games. They feel a little bit tedious, but just go in and try to do your best.
AJ, what if the interviewer you're talking with is significantly older or significantly younger than you are? Do you conduct yourself somehow differently in that situation?
The biggest thing that I like to do in interviews is I don't want to assume something. So if, let's say, you're a younger interviewer, I'm not going to throw Gen Z slang at you. However, if I hear you talking with Gen Z slang and you're talking more like a student versus a mid-career professional, I will try to match what you are doing, what you're saying. And I think it's very similar to reading the room. So again, I would try to treat every interview the same. Obviously, you want to show respect. You don't want to use any words that you wouldn't use with a friend or family. However, if they are a little bit more open and they're smiling and you ask them how their day's going and they say, oh, I had an amazing weekend. I was at a restaurant yesterday with friends and then today I went surfing and X, Y, and Z. Don't be afraid to also share what you actually did. And you don't have to be super buttoned up. So talk about what you did over the weekend, right? Versus if it's super professional and they said, how was your weekend? He's like, oh, it was great. How was yours? I wouldn't go super into detail about what you did because you're trying to match the room and the energy.
AJ, what are you seeing regarding putting your COVID vaccine status on your resume or LinkedIn? Does that make sense at all in today's environment?
It's a great question. I have never been asked that question, to be honest with you. I personally would not, just because I think it's a little bit personal to me. It probably is going to be a question on the application if you are vaccinated or not. Not every company requires it. So I personally probably would not do that. And I would imagine that you would at least get the interview and that could be something that you can talk about, because I know you can avoid getting the vaccine if it's a religious reason or a couple other reasons. But that's probably something that to me is not relevant to get an interview. Maybe to actually accept the job offer, sure. But to get the interview, I would focus on your experience and if you're a good fit for the role in the company.
AJ, I was once told that applicants need to clean up their digital footprint. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's another great question. So the digital footprint, at least from how I understand it, is your presence online, your digital brand or your personal brand. And how it could be tricky is if you are very different with your friends compared to what you do professionally with your company, you just have to be careful. And if I search someone's name on Google and your Instagram pops up and it's public and I see pictures of you partying in college, in Greek life, every weekend you're chugging beers, whatever it may be, you have to just be careful, because once you join a company, you're not just representing yourself, you are a representation of the company. So I would first suggest to put your social media profiles on private. That's the first thing. The second thing is whenever you post a picture or send something to the world and put it online, just know that a lot more people will be able to see it than you think. So you have to be careful. You can also Google yourself and see what comes up, because you could be the best applicant in the world, someone who we loved interviewing, and you're a great fit for the role in the company. But again, if I see a ton of red flags and you're polarizing on a topic or you're almost bullying someone online, that could actually completely take you out of the interview process and get you a rejection. So just be very careful with your digital footprint and be aware going forward that anything you put online can most likely be seen by an employer.
What does a recruiter look for in a candidate they want to hire? I mean, I get that it depends in terms of the position, the technical skills, but what are the other things that they're going to be looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I've been super fortunate so I interview recruiters on the podcast that I host called The Final Round. And I would say for every single conversation that I've had with 20 plus recruiters, you have to just take a step back. And the best way to work with a recruiter in the most efficient way is to put yourself in the shoes of a recruiter and ask yourself, what do they do day to day, right? Their job is to bring qualified candidates, screen them, look at their application, look at their resume, maybe a cover letter, and pass them over to the hiring managers to do the interview to see if they're a good fit for that team, that role. So recruiters are looking for any red flags, right? Like you said, the digital footprint, if you're the best person on a resume, but you have a very poor social media presence and you're posting things that are derogatory, that have bad language, whatever it is, like that is a huge red flag. So a recruiter's job is to bring good talent into the company, specifically to the roles that you're applying for, right? And they help recruit for different roles. So going back to your question a few questions ago, look at the application, look at your experiences, tailor your resume and your outreach to what they're looking for. And it's going to be a very easy way to work with recruiters because recruiters want to talk to you, right? They want to work with qualified candidates. So if you can help them, they'll help you and they'll push you to the hiring manager. And I would say that's the biggest thing is just knowing that recruiters are your friends. They're here to help you, not to hurt you. They're not trying to trick you. Be honest with recruiters. No, they're very busy. They're not career coaches. They're recruiters. So don't just send your resume and say, hey, can I get some feedback, right? They're going to get very peeved. And also, don't be afraid to engage with them on LinkedIn. They're going to post a lot of content. Some are more experienced content creators than others, but build those relationships early. So again, when you reach out for maybe an intro chat, or you reach out about a question about the application, they're going to remember, oh, Bob always comments on my LinkedIn posts. So I'm going to respond to him because he's almost a friend of mine versus a cold outreach message.
AJ, looking for that next great opportunity is sometimes not the most enjoyable experience that we might have. How can we remain focused when we're looking for that next job?
The topic of focus is tricky because I think that people go into the job search and just do what they think they need to do as a network, build your application, your resume, your online personal brand, all those other things. However, mindset to me is the biggest answer to your question. And we interviewed a recruiter from Facebook, or obviously now they rebranded to Meta, on the podcast, The Final Round. And all we talked about was mindset. And she even said that so many candidates put these, let's say, FANG companies, right? Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, on these pedestals. And your focus is going to get lost. You're not going to be motivated. You're not even going to apply because you think you're going to get rejected. So mindset is everything going into the job search. It's not just the things like networking, resumes, cover letters, etc., but going in with a very open mind, knowing that it's going to be an uphill battle. It's challenging, right? Yes, we're in a candidate's market, but getting a job is a job in itself. So go in and try to have some accountability buddies. Ideally, it's a mentor who's older than you. But if not, have some friends who you're job searching with, have classmates, peers, family members, friends, whatever it may be to check in with you, because it is a strain on your mental health if you don't balance your life around it as well. And just remember that it takes time. It's not something where you get a job in a day. Going back to networking as well, it's a long road. So as long as you do everything you can to build up those opportunities in the pipeline and have multiple in the pipeline versus just one target company, like I want to work at Google, I'm only going to apply to Google, only going to network at Google. That's stupid, right? Versus broadening your reach and search. That's the best way that you can continue having peak performance, peak focus, and peak mindset.
AJ, if you were to coach someone about taking one key action a day, what would the key action that you would suggest that they implement to help them in their job transition?
To me, that's a super easy answer. And I know I've been hammering that networking is everything, but it truly is. And that one action would literally be to put yourself out there and to outreach to people, right? I've met folks who are freshmen and sophomores in college or at a university. And I asked them, what are you doing for the summer? And they said, oh, well, I'm not eligible for internships. And I said, you know what? You're probably right. For a lot of the larger corporations, they only hire, or they'll only bring in junior summer interns because they want them to return full-time senior year because they're going to graduate soon. So I get that you're not eligible for certain opportunities, But then I asked, have you applied to mid-sized companies? Have you reached out to startups? And literally putting yourself out there and sending a tailored outreach message to a founder of a small to mid-sized company, right? There's no competition because there's no internship that exists. But if you put yourself out there and you explain your value and you tailor that to what the company is doing, I've built up and actually received multiple internship opportunities, not because I applied and got an offer to an opportunity that existed, but I'm someone who creates opportunity that's never existed before, right? I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say, wow, you're so lucky. And I would disagree, right? I think everyone has different cards that they're dealt, but you have to create your own luck. And to create your own luck, you have to put yourself out there. Even if you're introverted, that's not an excuse. You have to put yourself out there, be comfortable being uncomfortable. And the more people you meet means the more people in your corner. And the more people in your corner who are rooting for you, who can help you and mentor you and support you, is going to be extremely beneficial and pay dividends versus someone who's never put themselves out there.
AJ, now we're going to go into our lightning round section of the podcast where I'm going to give you just an area. And if you would, talk 15, 20 seconds about that area. The first one is elevator speech.
I would say that you need to practice it. Absolutely. I think the term elevator pitch or speech is not the best phrase because the elevator is much longer than you would think. It's probably a 100-story building rather than a 3-story building. But the real thing you need to practice is that it should not be super structured. If it sounds like a canned response, you sound less organic and it's hard to build a relationship. But if I hop on a call with you, Bob, and I've never met you before, right? And we're just having an intro chat in a networking setting. I'm not trying to grill you. If I ask you your elevator pitch, I'm going to say, hey, Bob, tell me about yourself. Not because it's an interview, because I know nothing about you. Maybe I have your LinkedIn pulled up. So just be prepared to talk about yourself, what you're doing currently, what you've done in the past, work experience and internship and school-wise, and what you want to do and how I can help you.
Dress for interviews, either on Zoom or in person.
This is another item where you can ask the recruiter. So I would not send 5 follow-up emails, but when you get the interview, if it's not listed, I would ask the recruiter, hey, or the hiring manager, hey, can you share the interview format, any other resources you can share from the company? Also, what's the dress code? Because in the dress code has gotten much more casual over the years, but I would always suggest going a notch above the other person. So if I hop into an interview with a tech startup and the interviewer is a hiring manager and he or she is wearing a short sleeve shirt, like a t-shirt, and I'm wearing business casual, that only comes off as, wow, I'm professional, right? Versus if it's the other way around and I'm talking to a bank and the other person's wearing a suit and tie and I come in as wearing a t-shirt, that's a bad look. So ask the recruiter or hiring manager in the email, it's totally appropriate. If not, I would say business casual is a great place to dive in.
Thank you notes after the interview.
1000%. If you don't send one, you are wasting an opportunity. I've seen a lot of really poor quality content on LinkedIn, especially saying, don't send a thank you note. It doesn't matter. To me, and I've done a lot of interviewing on the other side of things, and we hire different roles for the final round. One of the criteria in your application where you literally get scored for us is, did they send a thank you note or message or email, or did they not send one? That to me shows you're really interested, you're passionate about the role. And it's a small data point, but when you're talking about the final round interview, the small data points are what put you above everybody else. So absolutely send one. And also, really quick tip, because I know it's a 30-second answer segment, make sure it's tailored to what we talked about. If you copy that thank you note to the next interview at the next company, that means it's a poorly written thank you note. It should be so tailored, talking about what you discussed, where that person's going this weekend, what you enjoyed about that person. Again, tailor thank you messages and always send them after you chat with somebody.
References.
References are huge. If you can get a reference or a referral at any company, it is only going to help you. And I think that's a fact. That being said, a lot of people think that if you don't have a referral or a reference, you cannot get the interview. That is extremely false. So I would say if you can get one, great, and you get them through really effective networking. But if not, don't worry, you're gonna have to go through the front door versus the side or back door. But again, if you're a recruiter or a hiring manager, interviewing and bringing candidates on is a big risk. How you de-risk or mitigate that risk is saying, oh, Bob works for us. Bob recommended this person, said that they were friends in college and they were in the same consulting club, and this person is an A+ person. They're amazing. I'm more inclined to take that candidate versus someone who might look good on paper, who interviews well, but we don't know anybody who knows them. We don't have those mutual connections. So if you can get them, great, but just know that you don't need them to get the interview.
As we kind of wrap up here, any books or other resources that you'd recommend to someone who's going through their transition?
Absolutely. I would say one of my favorite books that I actually recently read is called The Third Door. It's an amazing story. And obviously, I don't want to share, all of the meat of the book, but you'll have to read it. But one of the biggest things is it talks about how people try to get into a nightclub, let's say, and there's the front door or general admission where you might have to pay or know somebody to get in. There's the second door, which is VIP, where you have to, let's say, buy a table and actually have real estate at the place. It's expensive. Or there's the third door. And the third door is the place where the cooks and the janitors and the people who work there get in. And sometimes I think in life, and I live by this quote, sometimes you're going to have to jump the fence, pretend that you're a waiter, and get in whatever means possible. And I think a lot of people think, going back to what I said earlier, that if there's no internship from X company, then they're not hiring interns. That cannot be more false. Reach out to the CEO, reach out to the founders, reach out to the team, and build your opportunities. That's why I love that book, The Third Door. A couple other books that I've read over the years that I think are great. Open by Andre Agassi. Elon Musk's biography was fantastic. How I Built This by Guy Raz. He also has a podcast. And if you're someone who's an entrepreneur or loves to hear different founding stories, that's great. And then the last resource, and I'll give a shameless plug, is the Final Round podcast, which I host. And again, we interview recruiters to help candidates get past the final round interview and knock out the competition. So those are just some resources, podcasts, and books that your listeners can either read or listen to.
AJ, if our listeners only remember 3 things as they go through their own personal transition, what are those 3 things that you want them to take away?
The first thing I would say is that change and transition is inevitable. Whatever chapter you are, whatever position you are in life, you will go through change, whether that's personal, professional, social, whatever it may be. So just you have to know that it is there and you have to adapt and be flexible. That is the first thing. The second thing is don't be afraid to ask for help. I've met so many people over the years who, are so proud and maybe almost have an ego that they're afraid to reach out and ask, well, can you give me directions? Or can you help me do XYZ thing, whatever it may be? So yes, you can try to do it on your own, but why not reach out to somebody who has been in your shoes, who just climbed the same mountain that you are climbing and can help you find the best route to take? So don't be afraid to ask for help and do it in a very organic way. The third one, and to me, again, this is how I live my life, is you have to look at the positive in quote unquote negative situations. So oftentimes, I think as humans, to the core, we do not like change. We like the status quo. And it's hard to grow when you don't have change. So if you look at the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, I am not saying that was anything positive. That being said, there are a lot of opportunities that came about because of the pandemic. And you have to look at the pros and the positive versus having a pessimistic view on the situation and look for the opportunities to help others, look for the opportunities to grow, and you'll never know what you find if you don't look for it.
AJ, thank you so much for your insights into the recruiting process, for how you keep your emotions positive, and how we have to be kind to ourselves. Thank you, AJ.
Of course, it was a blast, Bob. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully or without too many battle scars, survived their own obstacle courses and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.